Then, on my 70th birthday, they sent a cake by courier. It arrived lopsided in a warm box, with my name spelled wrong on the icing. No card, no call, just a text from my daughter that read, "Hope it got there in one piece. I'm Mary Carson, 70 years old," and that was the moment I knew they were done pretending. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks, it's strange how small the final moment feels. No blowout, no raised voices, just a box on a doorstep, sagging like a tired apology. That morning, I had set out the good dishes, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd knock. Even just for coffee, I boiled the kettle twice. By noon, I knew I didn't cry. Not that day. I cleaned up the table, took the tea towels off the chairs, and wrapped the still warm banana bread in foil. I poured the kettle water down the sink. I stared at that cake for a long time. Happy birthday, Marin. The courier must have assumed they made a mistake, probably figured it was going to a co-worker, maybe someone in accounting. Not a mother, not a grandmother. I'd had dreams once, as silly as that sounds. I was never one of those women who wanted to be famous or adored. I wanted a big family, a loud house, holidays where you couldn't hear yourself think over the laughter, and for a while, we had it. Or maybe I just thought we did. Maybe I mistook obligation for love. That night, I ate a small slice of that melting cake, sitting in the corner of my kitchen where the morning sun usually hits. It was too sweet, too soft. The kind of cake you send to people you don't know well. I didn't throw it away. I just stopped looking at it. I used to believe you earned your place in people's lives, that if you gave your whole self, your time, your money, your sleep, they'd keep a space warm for you. But that day, it hit me. People don't always love you back in the way you hope. Sometimes they just love the use of you. My daughter once told me I was too sensitive, that I take things too personally. But when your children stop calling you by the name they used when they were scared or sick, and instead send a text meant for a neighbor, it is personal. The worst part wasn't the cake, it was the line she sent a week later. When I saw photos online of a party with balloons, candles, faces I used to recognize, I asked, softly, just once, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" She said, "We didn't think you'd want to come." And just like that, I stopped asking. There was no fight, no dramatic exit. Just a clicking sound in my heart, like a door shutting somewhere deep. But before I ever reached that moment before the erasure, I was a woman who gave everything she had. There's a strange ache that lives in your hands when you've spent a life using them for other people. It's not the arthritis that came later, it's something quieter, like muscle memory that keeps reaching even after the reaching's no longer welcome. I was 21 when I married. July 6, 1976, the bicentennial year. He was a tall man with a teacher's calm and a way of listening that made you feel chosen. We moved into a small duplex just outside St. Paul, linoleum floors, yellow cabinets, a window that faced the bus stop. We made it work. You always do, when you're young and in love and don't know how much life can take from you without ever asking. I had my first child 2 years later, Claire, then not quite 3 years. After that, Thomas. I remember the way my body never fully bounced back, but I didn't care. I had little hands to hold, little cheeks to kiss. My days were full of crumbs and crayons and shoelaces I used to hum while folding their laundry. If heaven had a texture, I think it would feel like a still warm onesie pulled from the dryer. I gave up my job at the community library. Just for a year, I told myself. Then 2, then 5. Eventually, I stopped even wondering what I'd be if I wasn't theirs. We didn't have much money, but I learned to stretch everything. I made casseroles from pantry scraps, sewed patches into knees, sold baked goods at church fairs. Every birthday had a handmade banner and lopsided cake. Every Christmas, I stayed up late wrapping dollar store trinkets in gold foil to make them look like treasure. There was a year Tom got sick pneumonia. He was only 7, but it nearly took him. I slept upright in the hospital chair for 4 nights straight. I kept humming the lullaby he liked, even though he didn't wake up for 2 days. When he did, the first word he whispered was "Mama," and in that moment, I thought I'll never need anything else. I really believed that. Time passed. My husband took a second job when the recession hit. Nights became longer. I started cleaning offices downtown, waking at 4:30, coming home by 7. Just in time to pack lunches and tie shoelaces, then straight to laundry, dishes, grocery store, PTA. I don't say this for pity. This was the shape of my love, quiet, repetitive, faithful. When my mother died, they were teenagers. I remember holding my grief in my throat because Claire had an audition and Tom had lost his math W. Workbook. I went to the funeral alone. They were too busy. I told myself, that's what parenting is, losing your place on the stage so your children can stand in the light. Years moved. The house grew louder with music and arguments and growth spurts. Then it grew quiet again. They went to college. I helped fill out every form. Took out a line of credit in my name to cover the gaps. They said thank you. They meant it. I remember hugging Claire the day she left for UCLA. She said, "I'll call you every Sunday." For a time she did. Tom was different. He was always quieter. Moved to Denver. Started a tech job. He'd answer texts with a thumbs up. One Christmas, he forgot to book his flight and said it was just too expensive last minute. I told him it was okay. I spent the day watching old home videos while the pot roast cooled on the counter. When my husband got sick, really sick, it was Claire who came first. She booked flights, helped with hospice papers, sat beside me while the machines ticked. But even then, it felt like she was always talking about work, her husband, the twins. There was a moment 2 nights before he passed when I sat alone in the living room, listening to his breathing from down the hall. I stared at our wedding photo on the bookshelf, my hands trembling slightly from the cold, and whispered, "Was I enough?" He died in 2013. I remember the exact color of the sky that morning. A soft, pale grey. It felt like the world had gone quiet in solidarity. The funeral was small. Tom flew in, but left before the burial. Claire gave the eulogy. I don't remember much of what she said, only that she called him a provider. And something inside me winced. He was so much more than that. But maybe children only remember the hands that fed them, not the soul that held the spoon. In the months after, I tried to stay busy, cleaned out closets, sold old tools, donated coats. Claire said, "You should move closer to us." I said I would think about it. But I didn't. I couldn't. This house held too many echoes. Still, I kept showing up. I sent cards for every birthday. Every grandchild's recital or report card got a note with a crisp bill folded inside. I babysat. When asked, I listened. When they needed to vent, I mailed care packages when the flu hit their houses. And every holiday, I asked, "Do you want me to come?" Sometimes they said yes, sometimes they said nothing. I learned to interpret silence as a polite no. I remember once, in 2019, I got a call at 2 a.m. Claire was in a panic. Her daughter had a fever and her husband was out of town. Could I drive over? I did, of course I did. I held that baby girl against my chest until she fell asleep, sticky with sweat and dreams. When Claire thanked me, I just nodded. But inside, a tiny part of me wanted her to see it, all of it, the quiet lifetime of yeses. I kept doing things that no one noticed. Refilling their Costco memberships, paying the annual family Netflix, Venmoing Tom's overdue phone bill, renewing the family Dropbox. I was the hidden thread in their lives, holding corners together while they moved through their own. That's what mothers do, even invisible. We keep stitching. Looking back, I don't think I expected anything grand in return. I didn't need medals or speeches. I just wanted to feel like they knew, that they saw me as something more than a default setting, that the things I did still mattered. But somewhere along the way, their lives grew faster, and I grew smaller, and slowly, over years, the phone calls shifted from checking in to asking for things. The questions stopped being about how I was, and more about what I could do. There was never a moment where they said, "We don't need you anymore," but I felt it, in the gaps, in the way my name disappeared from group chats, in the forgotten birthdays. The unacknowledged Mother's Days. Even now, I remember every gift I gave, every sacrifice made. I remember how their laughter used to echo off the walls like church bells, and how I clung to it, convinced it meant something sacred. I just never expected that love, when poured out for too long without being filled, could harden into something bitter. But it did, and soon, the quiet hurts would begin to pile. I think the pain that lingers longest is the kind that doesn't make a sound when it enters. No grand gestures of cruelty. No slammed doors. Just tiny, invisible cuts so small you hardly notice them at first, until one day, you run your hand across your chest and realize you're bleeding. After my husband passed, I noticed things shift in ways I couldn't quite explain out loud. Nothing anyone else would find offensive, but I knew it started with the absence of questions. No one asked how I was sleeping. No one asked what I was eating. Claire stopped calling on Sundays. Tom only texted when his internet was down or when a birthday gift had arrived late and he wanted to be sure it came. I remember holding the phone once, waiting for it to ring back. It never did. I told myself they were busy. Everyone's busy. That's the line we all use to pardon each other's drifting. But I've learned when someone says they're just busy, what they often mean is you're no longer urgent. To me, there were visits, of course, obligatory ones, the kind where they looked at their watches more than they looked at me, where the kids stayed in the car because it was just a quick drop-off. I'd bake shortbread cookies for the grandkids, wrap them in wax paper with twine. They'd sit untouched on the counter while Claire asked if I had remembered too. Switched to paperless billing for the utilities. One Thanksgiving, Claire hosted. She told me she'd assigned me cranberry sauce, a plastic tub of it, bought, not made. I remember standing in line at the store with that wobbling cylinder of jelly, feeling small. I used to cook the whole feast, roast turkey, cornbread stuffing, yams with burnt marshmallows, pies from scratch, but that year I was the cranberry lady at the table. They didn't ask me to say grace. They didn't save me a seat at the head. I was between the twins and the kitchen door, where the draft kept touching the back of my neck. Halfway through the meal, I dropped my fork. No one looked up. I bent down to pick it up myself, and when I rose back up, it was like slipping into a role I hadn't auditioned for. The invisible guest. It's not just what they stopped doing. It's what they replaced me with. One Christmas, they gave me a blanket, not handmade, not thought through, just something store-bought, with the tag still on. The twins gave their other grandmother matching bracelets. When I opened mine, Claire said, "I know it's not much, but we figured you already have everything." I do not have everything. I have drawers filled with years, with shoe boxes of macaroni crafts and school photos with bent corners. I have notes that say "Love you, Mommy" in crayon. I have scars from C-sections and knees that ache when it rains. But no, I do not have everything, and slowly I began to feel that everything I'd ever been to them was fading into soft, grey outlines. Like the way photo ink blurs when it gets wet, I was still there but less necessary. Less real. Tom forgot my birthday twice. The second time, he called 2 days later and joked that it must be old age catching up with all of us. I laughed. What else could I do? I had spent the day alone, reading through old journals, finding scraps of my younger self buried in margins. There were bigger things too, though they came disguised as small ones. Claire once told me, "You're lucky you don't have to deal with real stress anymore." As if widowhood was a vacation. As if the echo of a house once full of footsteps was peaceful instead of deafening. Once, I offered to take the kids to the zoo. Claire said it wasn't necessary. "We're trying to limit screen time, so we're doing more structured outings." Structured. I laughed later, not at her but at the phrase. I was no longer considered structured enough. Just an open space with no utility. Tom changed his emergency contact to his girlfriend without telling me. I found out only because I was still listed on something from his college insurance that got sent to my address. I stared at that form, at the box with my name now blank, and sat in the kitchen for an hour without moving. One spring, the family had a picnic. I saw the photos on Facebook, blankets spread across the grass. Sun hats, little shoes off in the dirt, Claire holding her youngest on her hip while Tom grilled. I had not been told. When I asked, weeks later, just gently, Claire said, "It was kind of last minute, and besides, we didn't think you'd want to come all that way just for sandwiches." That's the part that broke me in pieces, too small to show anyone. The assumption that I wouldn't want to be there. As though I hadn't shown up every day of their childhoods without being asked. As though I hadn't rearranged my soul around theirs for decades. 100 quiet hurts. That's how it built. The little ways they unhooked me from their lives without ever saying it out loud. I stopped being consulted about holidays, my food wasn't requested, my stories weren't asked for. At one point, I tried to plan a family photo session, something for the mantle. Claire told me, kindly, that they already had one done last fall. Just them, we figured it was simpler that way. She said, simpler, I wanted to scream, just once, just to ask, what exactly about me complicates you now? But I didn't, I never raised my voice, not when they skipped my anniversary. Not when they told me, offhandedly, that they might be moving further out west. Not when the grandkids stopped hugging me without being reminded. Instead, I started writing things down. Not because I wanted proof, but because I needed somewhere to put the weight. I kept a small notebook in my nightstand. Every time I felt the sting of being erased, I'd jot down the moment like a timestamp. April 12th, Tom sent a group message about his promotion. Everyone replied. I said congratulations, no one answered. June 3rd, Claire said the kids didn't really know me well enough to stay over for a weekend. Each entry was a breath I hadn't released, each page a confession I couldn't speak aloud. Some people are pushed out of their families with harsh words and slammed doors. I was not. I was faded out gently, like background music someone slowly turns down until it's gone. And no one notices they're sitting in silence. I kept giving them the benefit of the doubt, kept assuming I was imagining it. But you can't imagine that kind of emptiness. You just live with it, and it was all leading somewhere. I didn't know it yet, but soon they'd cross a line I couldn't ignore, and I wouldn't be the one to apologize anymore. It didn't happen all at once, but when it finally did, it came like a hush after thunder, quiet, icy, irreversible. It was early November. The air had just started to shift. You could smell the first hint of winter in the mornings, frost in the soil, chimney smoke lacing through bare branches. I had just come home from the pharmacy. Picked up my blood pressure pills and a new bottle of joint cream. I remember the light was slanting through the curtains just right. Everything had that golden look, like a painting too still to disturb. My phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Just a line. Hey Mom, can we talk sometime this week? Just about a couple things with the house. The house. She never said your house, just the house. Like it was already being passed. Around in past tense, I told her to call when she could. That night, she did. I could hear her chewing gum, walking around, always multitasking. She said they'd been talking, her and Tom, and that, with everything going on, it might be time to think about restructuring things. That phrase hung in the air like stale perfume. I asked what she meant. She said they were just worried. About me, about how I was handling bills and maintenance, and what if I had a fall and no one knew for ours. At first, I thought it was concern, maybe even love dressed as logistics. But then she mentioned a form. She said Tom had drafted something up, a simple adjustment, just to help out, something about shared decision-making, financial oversight, just to be safe, she said, a backup plan. I asked her to send it to me. She did. It was a power of attorney, durable, financial. It gave them full control over the house, over the accounts, over nearly every piece of my life that still belonged solely to me. I read it for times, each time slower. It wasn't just about oversight. It wasn't about making sure I was safe or supported. It was about control, about ownership, about reshaping the landscape of trust into something transactional. I didn't sign it. I didn't even call her back. Instead, I took a long walk, just down the block. The leaves were brittle and bright reds, and oranges crunching under my shoes like dried petals. I passed Mrs. Halverson's place. She was on her porch with her oxygen tank, waving like always. I waved back, but didn't stop. I just kept walking, trying to find the edge of something that wouldn't split open. Later that week, I called my bank just to ask a few quiet questions about the mortgage, about the deed, about the status of the family account I'd been maintaining for years, where the streaming bills and shared subscriptions lived, the emergency money for the grandkids' braces, the holiday fund I quietly padded each month. It turned out they'd already accessed that account. They'd gone in with my login, changed the password, moved funds, set up recurring withdrawals into a new family trust they created without me. Without my name on it, without my signature. When I asked the bank representative how that was possible, she said the account had been marked with shared access, likely through a saved login, and that the routing changes had come from Claire's IP address. I hung up without finishing the call. I sat in the hallway, coat still on, bag still slung over my shoulder, and felt something slide off me, like a shawl slipping from tired shoulders. It wasn't rage, it was recognition. They hadn't just forgotten me, they'd erased me, the worst part. They probably thought they were doing the right thing, that this was responsible, that it was love, measured in spreadsheets and permissions. I could even hear Claire's voice in my head, saying, "We were just trying to help, Mom, but you don't help someone by ghostwriting their future." That night, I opened the old filing cabinet in the spare room, the one where I kept papers I hadn't touched since the funeral. I pulled out the deed, still in my name. I held it in my lap like an anchor. Cold, thick paper with edges that curled slightly from age. I traced my signature with my thumb. That signature still meant something, even if they had tried to write over it. I didn't call them, not right away. I needed to sit with the silence first. I needed to feel the full weight of what they'd done, not in anger, not for revenge, but for understanding. When you spend your whole life giving, you never expect your children to take what you haven't offered. You expect them to ask, to sit across from you, to say, "We're scared. We don't know how to do this without you." That's all I ever wanted, to be included in my own life. Instead, they made a decision, quietly, efficiently, like I was a liability, like I was already halfway gone. They didn't see the harm, of course not. That's the thing about subtle betrayal, it doesn't announce itself. It walks in dressed as love. But I knew. Deep in my bones, I knew this wasn't just a misstep. This was the crossing of a final line. The moment the curtain fell on the idea that we were still a family in the way I once believed, I thought about the last time Tom hugged me, really hugged me. It had been years. Maybe Christmas of 2016. He had on that navy sweater I bought him, and he smelled faintly of aftershave and bourbon. His hug had been brief, but full. Back then, I still had a place. Now, I was a placeholder, a signature waiting to be harvested, a name on a dotted line. It's a strange thing, feeling your purpose disassembled piece by piece. But what they didn't realize, what they'd never bothered to consider, is that I am not made of paper. I am not made of passwords and passive consent. I was made of mornings, of late-night rocking chairs and unpaid debts and birthday cakes shaped like dinosaurs. I was made of yes, after yes, after yes. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I could also be made of no. The next morning, I went online, changed the password, froze the account, closed the automatic drafts. I called the bank, moved everything into a new account under my name only. I cancelled the shared services, the cloud storage, the streaming bundles, the family Dropbox they hadn't backed up in months, and I did it quietly, no announcement, no fury, just motion. They would find out in time, but by then I would already be gone, not physically. I stayed in my house. I still watered the garden, still sat on the porch with my tea, but something inside me had stepped out and shut the door. I would speak less, I would wait, and they would feel the silence I had once filled, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. I didn't tell anyone what I had done, not right away. I let the quiet do the speaking for me. There is a kind of power in silence, though it doesn't feel like power at first. At first, it feels like surrender, like putting the phone back on the cradle without dialing, like writing a letter you never send. But over time, silence becomes something else, not absence. Exactly, more like resistance, a kind of stillness that stands firm. I began to move differently, not all at once, but with intention. First, I stopped initiating calls. I didn't ignore them, I just didn't start them anymore. The ones that used to begin with, "Hey, just checking in," or "Do you have a minute?" quietly disappeared. There were fewer than I thought there'd be, fewer than a mother should expect. I didn't tell Claire or Tom about the bank changes. I waited. It took them 3 weeks to notice. Claire finally sent a message. "Hey, just checking. I think something's off with the streaming logins. Can you check on your end?" I didn't respond right away. I waited 2 days. Then I replied, short, "I've decided to simplify. All shared accounts have been closed." There was a long silence. Then another message. "Okay, we just wish you would have told us first." I read that twice. The irony tasted bitter. They had taken control of my accounts, my decisions, without a word. But now that I had set a boundary, they suddenly wanted consultation. I didn't reply. That was the first week I noticed how quiet the house had truly become. Not just in the absence of sound, but in the absence of reach. No footsteps, no knocks, no unexpected visits, just the long exhale of an old home that had stopped bracing for guests. I started waking up earlier, 5:30 some days. The winter sun took its time coming through the blinds. I'd boil water, sit in the soft morning chill with a wool shawl over my shoulders, and sip tea without checking my phone. That alone was a shift. How little I missed the buzzing. I began to realize how often I'd been living in waiting. To be needed, waiting for a request, a reply, a reminder that I still belonged. I let that waiting go. Instead, I turned toward small, manageable things. I pulled out my recipe box and started rewriting cards, the ones with splatters from years of gravy spills. I reorganized them by season. I found my mother's handwriting on one card, her peach cobbler, and I traced it with my finger until the ink smudged. I called a lawyer, just to ask questions. A young womankind voice didn't talk down to me. We discussed the will, the deed, what I still owned outright. We clarified what couldn't be touched. She asked if I wanted to revoke any prior arrangements. Or shared powers. I told her yes, every single one. I mailed the signed forms from the post office on 8th and Maple, same place I used to send birthday invitations when the kids were little. That day, I passed a young couple with a toddler in tow. The father was balancing a juice box on one hand. The mother bent over tying a tiny sneaker. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, caught between nostalgia and relief. That afternoon, I cleaned out the hall closet, not for guests, for myself. I gave away coats no one claimed, board games we hadn't played in a decade. I made space not for what might come, but for what had already left. Tom finally called 2 weeks after the login reply. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, just said, "Hey, saw your message. Just wondering if everything's okay. Let me know if you need anything." I replayed it once, then deleted it. It wasn't cruel. I wasn't punishing. I was preserving. For years, I had padded every silence between us with reassurance, with effort, with cheerfulness. Now, I let the silence echo, let them feel its shape. I started keeping a small journal by the nightstand. Nothing elaborate, just lines, one a day, usually. Didn't miss the call today. Sunset was orange and kind. Cut the hydrangeas back. They're still trying. I wrote that. Last one on a Tuesday. There is something healing about the mundane when your heart has been bruised. Folding a dish towel just right, wiping baseboards, clipping dead leaves from a houseplant. It's not about distraction. It's about reclaiming attention, shifting it back inward. One evening, in early December, I walked past the hall where the family photos still hung. I stood for a while in front of the one from 1994. Christmas Eve, all 4 of us in matching pajamas. Claire had missing teeth. Tom was holding a stuffed bear. My husband had his arm around me, and I was laughing, probably at something corny he'd said. We looked happy, and we were. For a time, but photographs lie in their stillness. They capture moments, not motives. Smiles, not silences. I left the picture up, but I no longer turned toward it hoping to find something in it that would explain the now. Claire sent a Christmas card that year, just her. Her husband and the girls, a typed message, hope you're staying warm and well, wishing you peace this season. No mention of the missing, no acknowledgement of the drift. I placed the card in a drawer, not out of bitterness, just truth. I no longer displayed what didn't show me. By January, the silence had become something natural, like new skin. I had gone from always waiting for the phone to ring to forgetting it existed for hours at a time. I no longer padded conversations with niceties. I didn't ask if they needed anything. I didn't offer suggestions. I didn't remind them of upcoming birthdays or anniversaries. I didn't send boxes or money or streaming passwords. And they didn't ask. The stillness between us became mutual, not violent, just vast. For so long, I thought my job was to keep the peace, to fill every empty corner with presence. I didn't know I was allowed to stop, that I could sit still and watch things unravel without racing to retie them. There's no dramatic scene I can point to. No shouting match or final word, just the quiet aftermath of a truth too long denied. They had shown me who I was to them not once, but over years. Now, finally, I had started listening. My voice, once always ready to soothe or serve, had found a better use in stillness. It's not the kind of silence that waits to be broken. It's the kind that waits to be understood. The first time I realized I didn't owe them my old self anymore, I was standing in line at the DMV. It was January. Cold in that Minnesota kind of way, where the wind hits your jaw like a warning. I'd come to renew my ID. The woman behind the counter asked if I wanted to list an emergency contact. I paused. For the first time in my life, I left it blank. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was a quiet choosing not to pretend. From then on, I began making small changes, private ones. Meaningful only to me, I called the phone company and got off the family plan I'd been paying into for almost 14 years. They hadn't even noticed I was footing the bill. Not really. The monthly auto debit just hummed along, as expected. When I ended it, I didn't send a message. They'd find out when they needed to, like I had with the accounts. I wasn't being cruel. I was untethering. In February, I found a part-time position at the local library. Just 3 mornings a week, shelving returns, helping the older patrons set up their email, stamping books with that satisfying funk I'd loved in my 20s. The library had always been a sacred place to me, quiet, organized, full of stories that stayed on the page. I liked being around the hush of it again. It made me feel steady. The staff were kind. I didn't talk much about my past, just said I was recently widowed, semi-retired. I left out the parts about the erasure, the betrayal. Some wounds sound melodramatic out loud, especially when you're older, but the truth was, those quiet mornings between the stacks felt like reclaiming something that had once belonged to me. I started cooking for myself again, not the rushed, apologetic meals of someone eating alone, but slow things, roast vegetables, lemon broth soup. I set the table with the good dishes even if it was just me and a quiet evening. It felt ceremonial. Almost a way of saying, you still matter. I found a walking group. 3 women, all widows. We didn't speak much at first, just moved together down the river path every Tuesday morning. Scarves wrapped tight, breath misting in little clouds. Over time, we began to talk in pieces, not about family, mostly about birds, recipes, a good movie, the kind of things that keep the heart from calcifying. One morning, as we walked past a bench dusted with frost, Ruth said, "Funny how the world keeps going even after you stop being expected." That sentence lived in me for days. I'd stopped being expected, yes, but I hadn't stopped existing. In March, I bought a small wooden desk off Facebook Marketplace, $40. The man who sold it to me said it had been in his grandmother's sewing room. I placed it near the front window, next to the bookshelf. That desk became my space, for lists, for letters, for little things that made me feel visible to myself. I began writing again, not letters to them, letters to me, to the woman I'd been, to the girl I had once been proud of. I told her I remembered. I told her she didn't vanish. That she had never been just a mother, just a wife, just a name. On other people's documents, there was one Sunday in April that I'll never forget. I had woken up to sunlight streaking through the window, the robins already calling from the yard. I made tea and sat on the porch with a blanket and a pen. And I realized it had been a full month since I had spoken to Claire, 3 since Tom, and I wasn't aching. I missed them, of course. I missed the idea of them, the little versions, the soft ones who held my hand and trusted my voice. But the grown versions, the ones who now saw me as inconvenient, forgettable, surplus to need, I didn't miss what they had become. That realization didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like freedom. Later that week, I looked through my closet and packed boxes of things I no longer needed. The dress I wore to Claire's wedding, the blazer I always kept for nice occasions, I dropped them off at the community centre. The volunteer who took them smiled and said, "These are in beautiful shape," and I whispered, "Thank you," like she was talking to me, not the clothes. In May, I took a weekend trip by myself, just a small town a few hours away. Stayed in a bed and breakfast near a lake. The owners were an older couple, gentle and chatty. They served me blueberry pancakes on floral china, and no one asked why I was alone. I walked the shoreline each evening. I wrote postcards I never sent, one to Claire, one to Tom, one to myself. Back home, I started keeping fresh flowers on the table, something I used to do when the kids were little, before it started feeling too indulgent. But now, a vase of tulips or daffodils just for Me well, it felt like medicine. I joined a small meditation group at the senior centre, not because I'm spiritual, really, but because the act of sitting still, eyes closed, in a room full of strangers who weren't trying to fix me or define me, was the most peace I'd felt in years. They hadn't reached out in a while, not meaningfully. A forwarded meme from Tom, a vague happy spring, email from Claire, but no phone calls, no visits, no apologies. And I didn't chase them, not once. I used to think silence meant defeat, that if I wasn't trying, I was failing. But now I saw it differently. My silence wasn't surrender, it was a boundary, one they'd never thought I'd be strong enough to hold. I had spent so many years filling the gaps, patching the holes, keeping the plates spinning. Now I let them fall, and the sound they made, it wasn't chaos, it was closure. By early summer, I realized something had shifted in me permanently. I no longer checked my phone with expectation. I no longer watched the mailbox for a card that might never come. I no longer planned meals around the possibility of visitors. I started planting lavender, bought a small bench for the backyard. On warm days, I'd sit out there with a book and a glass of iced tea, bees humming nearby. It didn't feel lonely. It felt earned, everything I'd done before the streaming, the bills, the favors. The being on call, I had let it go, not with bitterness, with clarity, with choice. I had stepped out of the roles they assigned me, and into a life that, for the first time in years, finally belonged to me. It didn't happen all at once, just like their drifting away had been a slow, quiet erosion. The consequences of my absence took shape in subtle cracks. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I didn't need them to regret. I wasn't plotting. I was simply gone, like a hand pulled gently out of warm water, leaving ripples for a moment, then stillness. By the time summer settled in, my name had vanished from the center of their orbit, and so had my presence, not just in the logistical ways, though those mattered, but in the small, invisible ways they never thought to value until they were gone. I had always been the one who kept dates straight, doctor appointments, school projects, recital times, anniversaries. I used to send texts the night before, don't forget Lucy's allergy meds in the morning, or the school photo. Forms are due Friday, not because I had to, because it was instinct, because being needed gave me something to hold on to. When I stopped sending those reminders, they noticed, eventually. Claire called me in late June. The call came at 6:40 p.m. I was watching the sun set from the bench by the lavender patch. I let it ring. Her voicemail sounded rushed. Hey, just wondering if you still have the pediatrician's number on file. I can't find it, and Lucy's got this rash. Call when you can. I didn't return the call. A few days later, she texted again. Never mind, I found it. Hope you're well. I didn't respond. Tom was next. In July, he ran into trouble with a joint tax form I used to file for him. He must have assumed I'd still be handling it this year, as I always had. I had warned them before lightly that I wouldn't be able to keep doing their forms forever. But they didn't hear that, or maybe they chose not to. He emailed this time. Subject line, quick tax thing. Body, do you still have the files from 2020-2022? Can you send me the PDFs again? I read it once, then clicked archive. I imagined him sitting in his apartment in Denver, scanning through folders, calling his accountant, realizing quietly, maybe angrily, that the system he'd grown so used to no longer existed. Not because it broke, because it walked away. The family group chat, once a string of forwarded jokes, emojis, and reminders, went mostly dormant. When I stopped replying, the others did too. It turned out I had been the current running beneath the whole thing, keeping it moving, even if no one had seen me there. There were things I had done so instinctively they didn't even see them as acts. Birthday cards, timed perfectly to arrive the day before, packages for the girls. wrapped with recycled tissue paper and a handwritten note tucked under the tape. Amazon wish lists mysteriously fulfilled. Donations made in their names to their favourite cousins, all of it stopped. Silently, Claire sent in a mail in mid-July. Longer this time. Hi Mum, I just want to say I've noticed we haven't really talked in a while. I hope everything's okay. I know life's been weird, and maybe we took too much for granted. The girls miss you. I hope we can catch up soon. There was no apology, just a kind of gentle circling, a way of reaching that didn't quite touch the place I'd been hurt. I stared at it for a long while. I thought about how often I had been the one to initiate repair, to bridge awkward silences, to check in after hard words, to pretend wounds weren't as deep as they felt. This time, I let the silence stay, not out of spite, but because I needed her to learn the shape of what she'd let go. By late summer, I heard through Ruth, my walking friend, that Claire had been asking around at the senior centre about in-home care programs. Apparently, she assumed I'd enrolled in something. Ruth said she was polite but seemed worried. I think she thought, "You'd be more fragile by now," she added gently. I almost laughed. It was the kindest backhanded compliment I'd received in years. I wasn't fragile. I was just finally whole on my own terms. I could see it in their choices, too. How they were learning to adjust. I saw Claire's Instagram feed, less curated now, more raw. One post read, "Parenting is no joke. Shout out to single moms and village makers." It had dozens of likes. I said nothing, but I noticed she was learning. Finally, Tom, too, began to falter. His girlfriend messaged me once on Facebook. "Hi Mary, I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you had any advice for dealing with Tom's seasonal depression. He says you used to help him a lot when it got bad." I didn't answer. I didn't have it in me to hold him up from afar. It's a strange thing, watching them struggle without you, not with joy, but with solemn clarity. I didn't wish for their hardship. I only wished for recognition, for the invisible scaffolding I had once been to become visible in its absence. The longer I stayed gone, the clearer it became. I had been their net, soft, dependable, always there, and now that it was gone, the stumbles had consequences. In early September, a letter arrived, real paper, from Claire. She wrote about missing me, about the kids asking when Grandma would visit again, about how she knew things had been complicated, but that she hoped we could find a way back. It was the first thing that felt like an effort, not a text, not a quick message, a full letter, addressed in her handwriting, stamped, sent. I placed it in the drawer with the others. Not to ignore, just to hold, because I wasn't ready yet. Maybe one day I would be. But not now. They were learning what it meant to lose the one who kept the threads, the one who remembered, who held space, who said yes, yes, yes without question. I had never raised my voice, but my absence was speaking louder than I ever had, and slowly, they were starting to hear it. The letter sat on the desk for nearly a week before I touched it. Claire's handwriting on the envelope was careful, familiar, almost apologetic. My name written in soft loops across the front. Mom, not Mother. It had always been Mom when she wanted something close. The kind of closeness that doesn't announce itself, just slides across the table quietly and waits to be received. I didn't open it right away. I placed it next to the lamp on the wooden desk I'd bought back in February, the one that faced the window, where I sometimes sat with tea and let the sunlight find my hands. I glanced at it each morning. Like, you would a photograph of someone you used to know well. I wasn't avoiding it. I just didn't want to rush the moment. It felt sacred somehow, proof that maybe something had landed, that the silence hadn't been hollow after all. On the 7th morning, I opened it, no fanfare, just a slow tear at the edge, a breath held too long, a heart braced. Her words were different this time, not polished, not practical, just exposed, A daughter, no longer a woman performing responsibility. She didn't make excuses, didn't defend her choices. She said she hadn't realized how much I had been holding. That when she pictured Mom, she still thought of me as unshakable, and that maybe she had leaned on that too hard. She wrote, "I thought you'd always be there, so I didn't notice when I stopped asking if you wanted to be." That line stayed with me. I read it 3 times. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She didn't ask me to call. She didn't even ask me to come back. She just told me what she had come to see. And left it at that. She enclosed a picture the girls had drawn to stick figures holding hands. One labelled me, the other Grandma. Above them was a sun with too many rays. At the bottom, in crayon scrawled block letters, "Come back soon. I miss your soft hugs." I folded the letter, tucked it into the back of my journal, behind the entry where I had written, "Weeks earlier, they've stopped pretending to care. Maybe now I can stop pretending not to hurt." Later that evening, I took out my own letter. I had been writing pieces of it for months, not for them, for myself. For the part of me that still needed to name the ache. The part that needed to acknowledge not to the world, but to the woman in the mirror that what had been done to me wasn't just unfortunate, it had been real, and it had left a mark. The letter began with her, the girl I used to be. "Dear Mary," I wrote, "you didn't do anything wrong." That was the truth I needed most. Because even after all the boundaries, all the silence, all the quiet rebuilding, there was still a part of me that wondered if I had simply been too sensitive, too expectant, too much. I wrote to her about the kitchen she stood in while holding crying babies on her hip, about the nights she stayed up with fevers and deadlines, about the meals stretched thin, the compliments unsaid, the needs swallowed. I told her I remembered her. That she was seen. That she mattered, even when no one said it aloud. Then I wrote about the woman she became, the one who kept giving long after she stopped receiving. The one who bent so far she forgot what it felt like to stand upright, the one who had every reason to yell, but chose to go still instead. I told her I was proud of her, and then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I forgave her. For staying too long in places that didn't hold her, for always answering the phone, for thinking that being quiet was the same as being strong, for confusing loyalty with erasure, for loving in a way that made her invisible. I forgave her. I signed the letter simply, "Yours always." Then I folded it slowly, pressed it flat, and took it outside into the backyard. The lavender had bloomed early this year. It stood tall and soft in the golden light of early evening. I knelt beside it and dug a small hole beneath the bench I had claimed as my sanctuary. I placed the letter inside, covered it with earth, smoothed the dirt like a mother tucking in a child. I didn't cry. It wasn't grief this time. It was gratitude for the survival, for the voice I'd grown, for the silence that taught me how to listen to my own pain without needing anyone else to name it. That night, I sat on the bench as the light faded, and I thought about Claire's letter. I didn't know if I'd respond. Not yet. I wasn't ready to reach. But I was open to being reached, and that was something. It wasn't reconciliation I needed. It was recognition, and that small envelope on my desk had been the first honest offering in years. I thought of Tom, too. I wondered if he would write or visit. I didn't expect it, but I no longer needed it to feel full. They had lost me, yes, but I had found something, too, a stillness, a strength. A self I had set aside for so long that she felt like a stranger when I first heard her voice. Again. But she was here now. She spoke not in bitterness, but in boundaries. She didn't beg to be chosen. She chose herself. Before going in, I whispered something into the dusk, just for me. I was always enough, even when they forgot. And the night answered softly, the breeze warm against my cheek, like someone agreeing without words. The past didn't own me anymore. It was buried, tenderly, in the ground beneath the lavender. And I was still standing. It's a Tuesday morning. Now July. The light comes in gently through the kitchen curtains, settling across the floor like it's been invited. I keep the house cooler in the summer, not just for comfort, but because it makes the quiet feel like a bomb, soft, slow, spacious. The garden is thriving this year. I planted more than usual zinnias, marigolds, rosemary, and the lavender. Of course, the bees come in the morning, their little bodies bouncing from bloom to bloom like they've memorized the rhythm. I sit with my tea on the bench near the back fence, still wrapped in the old shawl I keep draped over the porch railing. I breathe, I listen, I exist. My days are not full. Not by the world's standards, but they are whole. There is a difference. I journal most mornings now, nothing elaborate, just a few lines, sometimes just a word. Yesterday it was stillness, today enough. I don't need to explain those words to anyone. I just need to see them, trace them with the pen, feel them as they land. The phone still rings sometimes, less than it used to, but differently, with intention. Claire calls every couple of weeks now, shorter calls, gentler in tone, not asking for things, just checking in. She still doesn't say the deeper things, not directly. But I can hear them under the surface, and I've stopped needing the apology to come in full sentences. Sometimes remorse speaks best in pauses. The girl sent a card for Mother's Day. Keep it on the fridge, next to a magnet shape like a teacup. Not because it erased anything, but because it was theirs, made by their hands, unprompted. Tom hasn't called. I'm not waiting. I've let go of the idea that every wound has to be mended. Some things stay cracked, and that's all right. The light finds its way through. Just the same, I started baking again, not for holidays, not for anyone else, just for the smell. Banana bread, molasses cookies, an apple crisp last weekend that made the whole house smell like 1987. I sliced a piece, set it on a plate, and ate it with both hands. No distractions. No phone in reach, no one to impress. Just the taste of cinnamon and thyme. The library job ended in late spring. They ran out of funding. I was sad for a day. Then I returned all the books I'd borrowed, left a note in the break room, and walked home slow. That night, I opened an old book from my own shelf, Willa Cather, I think, and read until my eyes stung. I hadn't done that in years. Sometimes I'd take the long way around the block on my walks, just to pass by the little pond where the geese gather. I don't feed them. I just sit, watch their movements. How they protect their young, how they hiss when strangers get too close. I admire that, the unapologetic boundaries. There are friends now, in different ways. Ruth still comes by every other Tuesday. We exchange tomatoes, talk about our knees, our gardens. The funny things we overheard at the grocery store. It's easy, undemanding, real, and then there are the quiet rituals I've grown into. Dusting every Sunday afternoon, lighting a candle before dinner, washing the windows once a month, not because anyone will notice, but because I like to see the sky without streaks. I still keep the photos on the hallway wall. I didn't take them down. I'm not angry, just older, wiser. I see the moments for what they were. I see her, the woman I was, standing in the center of a family she built, a house she tended, a life she sustained. I no longer mourn what wasn't said. I'm just grateful I finally saw what was mine. Sometimes I wonder what people think when they pass by my house and see me sitting there, just me and a cup of tea and a patch of lavender. Maybe they think I'm lonely, but I'm not. I'm quieter now. Yes, but not lonely. There's a difference. Loneliness is a hunger, quiet is a choice, and I've made mine. I no longer reach for what doesn't reach back. I no longer explain myself to people who once made me feel like explaining was a condition of being loved. I no longer perform worthiness. I am worthy. Because I breathe and wake and try again. Each day to treat myself gently. That's enough now. There are no grand plans ahead. No reinventions, no desire to start over. I don't need a new chapter. I'm still in this one. just reading it more slowly, a few weeks ago. I stood in the backyard and watched a butterfly land on the windowsill, pale yellow. Nearly transparent. I watched it for a long time. It didn't move. It just stayed there, like it knew this was a place where it could rest. That's how I feel in my life now, resting, not hiding, not punishing, just still. I used to think peace was something other people got to have, people with quieter children or less complicated hearts. But it turns out peace isn't granted, it's chosen, and I've chosen mine. So if you're still listening, still here, still wondering what became of me after the cake, after the accounts, after the slow withdrawal, I'll tell you. I am here. I am not waiting. I plant, I walk, I journal, I do not beg, and I do not belong to anyone who can't hold me with care. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. It's funny, the things we carry with us, not in boxes or suitcases or folders, but in the small folds of our lives, in the way we turn a doorknob or wash a plate or press a button on the coffee maker each morning. What stays isn't always what we think it will be. I carry silence with me now, not as a burden, but as a companion, a kind one, a patient one. The kind that lets me finish my thoughts before rushing in, the kind that holds space without rushing. To fill it, it's been nearly a year since the cake arrived on my doorstep, tilted, nameless, with its limp plastic knife and no one behind it. That day, I didn't know what I was stepping into, only what I was stepping out of. A version of myself that had spent decades folding and tucking and dimming. A mother who thought love meant never needing anything in return. But that version of me is gone. And the one who remains is quieter, yes, but not diminished. I've made peace with the way things fell apart, or maybe they didn't fall. Maybe they simply drifted, and I had just been holding the rope so tightly that when I finally let go, it felt like collapse. But it wasn't. It was relief. The house doesn't echo the way it used to, not because it's louder, but because I've filled it with small, deliberate things. A puzzle I leave out on the dining table, working on it little by little, a chair in the corner where I read until I forget the time, a set of watercolor brushes I bought in spring. Even though I hadn't painted in over 30 years, I dab at sky and tree and memory. The lines are shaky, but they're mine. Sometimes the phone rings. Sometimes it doesn't. I've stopped measuring my worth by how often it does. Claire called last week, just to say she'd made peach cobbler from my old recipe and that it didn't taste the same. She laughed, a little embarrassed, and said, "I think I left something out, or maybe it just needed you." It was the first time she'd said something like that. I didn't rush to fill the silence that followed. I let it settle, let it linger. She said the girls were asking about me, that they wanted to visit. "If you're open to it," she said gently, "no pressure." I told her I'd think about it, and I meant that not as a test, not as punishment, but because now I consider myself first. That's not selfishness, that's healing. There's a part of me that still longs for things, for a proper apology, for a moment of sitting across the table from them and hearing them say, "We see you now," but I no longer expect it. I've learned that closure rarely arrives dressed the way we imagine. It doesn't come with fanfare or fixed timelines. Sometimes it comes disguised as a quiet afternoon when you realize you haven't thought about the pain in ours. I keep that letter Claire sent tucked into a book I reread every winter. It's not a perfect letter, but it's real, and that's more than I ever asked for, back when all I wanted was recognition. Tom hasn't written. I don't know if he will, but sometimes when I look out at the dusk light settling across the lawn, I remember him as a boy, quiet, serious, with that furrowed brow he had even at 6 years old. I hope that boy is still somewhere inside the man. I hope he's safe. I hope he heals. I've learned not to hold people in place, even in memory. They'll change or they won't. But you can't wait for someone else to hand you your own. Peace, I've found friendship in ways I didn't expect. Ruth and I now walk twice a week, and sometimes we just sit on her porch, drinking weak coffee and watching her cat chase shadows. It's ordinary, and it's enough. I also started writing letters I'll never send, to my husband, to my children, to myself. I write them not to bridge the distance, but to clear the space inside me where resentment used to live. It helps. One of them reads, "I gave you the best of me, I gave it freely, and I don't regret it. But now the best of me belongs to me again. I hope you understand. I hope you learn what it cost. I burn some of the letters after I write them. Others I keep folded in a drawer. They don't weigh me down, they release me." There's a woman I see at the farmer's market on Saturdays. Always in a sun hat, she sells handmade soaps and hums while she works. A few weeks ago, we started talking. Just small things: lavender oil, the heat, the price of tomatoes. But something about her presence is grounding. I don't know if we'll become friends, or just familiar faces. Either way, I like being seen. Without history attached, that's what this season of life has become: being seen without being defined. Being known without being used. It's slow, yes, but it's mine. I still get mail addressed to Mrs. Carson, though I've stopped correcting it. Let them address me however they need. I know who I am now. I'm Mary. I'm 70. I'm alive, not just in body, but in soul, in voice, in presence. You can miss me, or you can meet me again. But you can't have the version of me who didn't know how to draw a line. She's resting now, under the lavender, beside the letter, in a place where the ground is soft and sacred. I've moved on without moving away, and if they ever come back, I'll be here, not waiting, but standing, still. Still here, still whole, still choosing peace. Because that is the quiet I built from the wreckage. That is the life I made from the silence, and no one can take it from me.